What is going on, IF Warriors? It's your boy Edward V. Today we're going to talk about a massive new study that included 70 different publications, a meta-analysis and systematic review that shows that intermittent fasting is actually amazing for burning body fat. We're going to go ahead and dive into that study in this video. Stay tuned. This meta-analysis, it started with 1,153 different publications and was diluted for replication, not meeting their criteria where they wanted to utilize non-exercise females and males. So from there, it went from 1,153 to 755 publications. And for the criteria to be met of the 755, 70 publications were utilized, making this one of the largest meta-analysis of all time for intermittent fasting. Now, if you're not familiar with how the hierarchy of studies work, meta-analysis are at the top. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis are at the top and rank the highest for the most important statistical and study information that can be provided. There were 2,947 participants across all of these different study publications. They put them together and they viewed the results. They set it up in a certain way. Now, all of the publications that we're looking at Ramadan studies. Ramadan studies are very, very good to utilize and look at when determining the benefits of intermittent fasting, because one, the fasting is 0 calorie intake across the board. All nations who are doing Ramadan fasting, they do not consume anything at all from sunrise to sunset. However, keep in mind that the variation of the timing varied from 10 hours of fasting all the way up until 17 hours because the sunrise to sunset is shorter in certain places of the world and takes longer in other places. So the least amount of time that they were fasting is 10 hours, and the most amount of time that they were fasting, according to all of these publications, was 17 hours. But we can rest assured that during this fasting time, they're doing 100% 0 caloric intake. The age range from the study was 16 to 70 years old, so you're getting a very wide gap so that you can get a better understanding of the results in relations to the general public. So this is how they looked at the numbers and the data. They set up 3 different sections. It was pre-Ramadan, which was 21 days before the Ramadan period. It was post-Ramadan, which was day 14 within the Ramadan cycle up until 7 days after the Ramadan cycle. And there was the follow-up period, which was 14 to 35 days after the Ramadan cycle. And just for some context, Ramadan lasts for about 1 month. And if you're wondering, because there's always the question of males do better than females, or do females even get benefits from fasting over males or what have you, there were no significant difference between the male group and the female group. It was statistically the same for both groups in relation to all the data. What they saw was that weight loss and fat loss was significant between all publications for both male and female. The study showed that Ramadan fasting can be a viable option to combat against obesity and being overweight, as one of the most important things is preserving as much muscle as you can when losing weight. And although lean mass was lost during the fasting period as shown in the study, keep in mind that all of the participants did not do any physical training during the Ramadan fasting time. If they did do training, they were excluded from the publication as they wanted to keep it a level playing field across all of the different publications. So if you're not doing any resistance training, there's only so much that your body can do to preserve muscle. But even with that obstacle in front of them, there was 30% less lean mass lost than fat loss. So fat loss was the most predominant element that was lost with the overall weight loss. And as expected, obese and overweight participants lost more fat and more weight than the normal weight participants. And this is consistent with the normal notion that the more weight that you carry, the faster it is to lose that weight. Also keep in mind that this publication did detect that there were differences in weight loss depending on where the location of the person was. So westernized countries like North America lost less weight than European countries, for example. This could be in relation to how they're consuming their food or what type of food they're consuming. Just keep in mind that the duration of the fast is different for a lot of different people depending on where you're located. You might have a longer fast or you might have a shorter fast, but they did use a regression formula to test to see if this duration variation was affecting the statistical significance of the overall weight weight loss between all 70 publications, and they noticed that there was no difference in terms of that variation. Looking at that variation, although weight loss was a bit higher with groups that fasted for longer, it wasn't statistically significant. So just keep that in mind. So there were no interventions in terms of the physicality and diet. However, 13 of the 70 publications actually were able to report their caloric intake. And unlike a lot of studies, this was not a reporting in which 1 year later they're requesting for you to remember what you took in. This was done on a weekly and daily basis. And you would think that they would report eating less during the Ramadan fasting time. But out of these 13 publications that reported the caloric intake, 7 reported that they were actually eating more during the Ramadan fasting time frame. And just for some context, during the pre-Ramadan range, they had a base level weight and fat mass. During the post-Ramadan range, they lost a significant amount of weight and a significant amount of fat. And during the follow-up, when they were no longer doing the Ramadan fasting, they regained the weight that they had before going into Ramadan fasting. And 7 of the 13 that were reporting energy intake reported that during the Ramadan fasting time frame, they were consuming more, and this is probably to compensate for the entire fasting period. And keep in mind that they do eat at very obscure time frames, sometimes adding food intake during the early mornings, eating multiple meals during that eating time frame. And then of the 13, 4 of the publications reported that they did not change what they were eating. So this is pretty easy for them to measure, considering that it was being reported on a daily and weekly basis. They knew what they were eating when they didn't do Ramadan fasting, and they knew what they were eating when they were doing Ramadan fasting, and they didn't change what they were eating. So the energy intake was the same, yet the fat loss was still statistically significant during the Ramadan time frame. Only 2 of the 13 publications that reported the energy intake actually reported eating less during the Ramadan time frame. But overall, all of the 70 publications had statistical significance to fat loss and weight loss. And because muscle was more primarily protected even without the physical resistance training, it showed that Ramadan fasting can be a very good viable option to combat being overweight and obesity, since protecting muscle, as we know, increases glucose homeostasis, increases metabolic rate, and is overall more biologically healthier for you to retain muscle and lose body fat, which is the case within this large meta-analysis. So that is the breakdown of this Ramadan study meta-analysis, a new study that was recently released that shows a massive advantage when doing an intermittent fasting protocol. If you want to take a look at the study for yourself, you can go ahead and click the link down in the description below. Within that study, you could actually link to every individual publication if you so choose. And of course, I want to thank my patrons from my Patreon, and I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here.